As I invite Ruchika to come and join us, I'll introduce Ruchika. Has worked in marketing and strategy over 20 years, with global experience right across the energy sector, and has a commercial acumen in both electricity and in oil wholesale distribution and demand response and energy efficiency programs, and has worked with startups and also right up into the Fortune 500s about how to use customer insights to drive profitability. So we've talked this morning about what the opportunities are. We've now heard about how the government is playing a role. You're now going to tell us how we get rid of all the roadblocks to fix it all.
Let's talk turkey.
Okay, great. Lovely to have you here. Good morning.
Thank you so much. No worries. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
You're standing in between us and
I know. I've got the best time slot right before lunch. So yes, but thank you. And just while Michelle brings up the presentation, I also wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So this is the clicker. That's I can. Yeah. Cool. All right. Wonderful. All right. I will breeze through the things that you need to know. It's also nice to know that we're all sort of singing from the same hymn book, because there were slides in previous presentations that I was thinking about putting in mine, and I'm really glad that I didn't. So just a little bit of background about C4Net, right? Center for New Energy Technologies. We're a member-based organization that was started in collaboration with DELP, the current distribution network service providers within Victoria, of which there are 5, and a series of university partners, including Federation University as well. And we have 2 major functional areas. We do early stage research support, so we fund early stage research into a variety of different energy topics. They center around 4 key areas. One is anything to do with the provision of electricity data, anything that's going to help drive the adoption of new technologies and the integration of new technologies that make sense for our network. Anything that's going to address the ever-present, emerging, and tremendous skills gap that is existing within the sector, particularly outside of the areas of engineering, perhaps. And then whatever we can do to help support through our research the enablement of evidence-based policy decisions, which is a little bit about what we're going to get into today, try to bring it together. Really, I'm going to try to leave time for questions and interrogation. Just a couple of key updates. I'll skip through some of it. We've got about $10 million in our pipeline to fund energy research. We've launched our data access service, which is something that might be of significant interest to people in this room. This is where we provide a pathway for external stakeholders to access electricity data that is currently managed by distribution network service providers. We launched that this year. It's been a tremendous success. If you're looking to do any kind of community energy project, it's a good idea for your consultants or your feasibility studies to start with this type of energy data. And then we're also developing an enhanced system plan as a major piece of work within Victoria. And that addresses some of the gaps that were alluded to by both Dhamika and Alistair in the distribution network being a source of positive impact or total system impact, particularly as you look to go from a bottom-up approach. So we've got the renewable energy zones, we've got a lot of opportunities handling in large-scale transmission planning through AEMO and other regulatory and policy bodies. We're proposing that we take a look at what's available on the distributed energy side with distribution companies, and that we look to whole-of-system planning from that perspective as well, so that we can make the most efficient transition to renewables. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the drivers, what we're seeing in our position as the Center for New Energy Technology, and then a little bit of tactical change opportunities that some people in this room might find helpful, and or that we should probably be discussing at a sector-wide level as well. So first thing that we're noticing is community energy groups are significantly growing in both the number and sophistication, particularly in the past 5 years. This is really important because if you look at the impact that these community energy groups can have, particularly with the existing infrastructure, This is where you sort of stop being the mosquito in someone's ear and you start actually being able to affect some significant change. I think, and this is probably underestimating the number of community energy projects that are going on in Victoria right now, but 5 years ago it was in the 20s, you're looking at in the 60s, we're getting into the hundreds, and there's a lot that's driving that from a policy perspective as well, the Neighborhood Battery Initiative, some other opportunities around microgrids, and we'll talk a little bit about standalone power systems as well. Each group is looking for a different solution. This kind of gets to what some of the other speakers were talking about. When you're considering your community energy needs, you have to focus on your needs first and be very specific about what it is you're looking to solve for. There's a lot of conversations that we're having within the sector where community energy groups, consultants, folks who are looking to drive innovative solutions in terms of their connections are trying to solve for problems that they believe exist in other parts of the network and other parts of the system. And that presents real challenges. If we focus on what the communities need and clearly articulate the value proposition to the communities and use that to form what is ultimately a connections agreement with the distribution companies, that helps frame it within the existing context of how to get your project through the framework currently and into a more viable state of feasibility. So DNSPs, again, they're cooperative in this area, but this isn't their primary service offering. This is something entirely new for them. They don't have a process for community energy connections. They don't have people that are allocated to work directly with you and account manage what is an idea into a feasibility study, into a business case analysis, and through to fruition. They are still ultimately what we would call connections, poles, and wires. And while there's change being driven in this sector, I think, again, Alistair mentioned the regulatory existing framework is not set up to handle this as quickly, I think, as anybody in this room would like to see. But things like the Neighborhood Battery Initiative are driving very significant change in this area. This is an example of the type of impact that policy, great policy initiatives like what Dell put forward with Solar Homes, Vic, and how that can actually impact DNSPs. And this is just a case study, for example. So we know about Solar Homes Victoria. We know it's helped about 200,000 residents put solar on their roof. The really interesting piece here is that you're seeing both an increase in the number of solar that's being put on rooftops and the size of solar that's being put on rooftops. And here's how this translates into impacts, particularly around storage, right? You've got your average resident, they see that they can get a rebate on solar, they go to their retailer, they get solar put on their roof. The retailer is trying to sell them as many panels as possible because there's a fixed cost in going out to their home, and they make up most of their money by putting panels on top of their roof. So now you've got a consumer that perhaps uses 3 to 4 kilowatts of energy right now, and they've got maybe a 6 to 8 kilowatts of electricity on their roof. They want to export that, they want to take advantage of the feed-in tariff. The transmission or the distribution system in that area cannot handle the amount of people that want to export at the same time. Enter storage. Community batteries now become a really viable option for those folks to be able to export their solar in localized ways that can then support the broader community as well, right? Distribution companies did not see this coming, right? The way that they're looking at this problem is they see it as a power quality issue. So they've got regulatory requirements, and the reason why they're actually limiting the amount of export that people can send from their homes back to the network is because it's causing their voltage variations outside of the regulatory requirements, right? So they're responding, they're reacting through their regulatory requirements and policy requirements in order to invest in the infrastructure that we would like to see being proactive. There are alternatives to individual residential export in the wholesale market, and that's, again, predominantly by taking those exports and putting them into a battery. And I think probably most people in the room have seen this slide. This is the ANU study that was done on the value of community batteries. And they looked at 4 different ownership models for community batteries and how those ownership models effectively benefit different stakeholders, whether that's the network or the community. Really just quickly to summarize, they found that the third-party community-owned battery is probably the best way to go. And one of the really key things to keep in mind is they avoided network upgrade benefits because they weren't modeled in these scenarios, right? Because one, We don't know what the networks are doing from their planning perspective. So if you create your community energy solution, whether that's a battery or a virtual power plant or a microgrid, whatever it is, based on network upgrades or potential network benefits, the networks are not set up to collaborate with you on that currently, right? This again reinforces the idea that you need to make your business case analysis based on what is best for your community and your local area. So again, the distribution companies. I put in like some screenshots of their websites because I think it's really critical that as we try to collaborate with these groups, we understand what they are fundamentally, which is connections organizations. The top option for each of these folks, whether it's City Power, Power Corps, United Energy, Gemina, AusNet, is to connect the group. You come to them with an application, you say, I want to connect here, here's the size of the connection that I need. They can then go in and model the impact at that location, come back to you, this is how much it's going to cost. That's what they're set up to do, that's what they're set up to do well. They are not set up well for the city of Ballarat to come to them and say, hey, can you have a look at all of our electricity use at our city-owned or council-owned locations? Can you then help us put together a feasibility study for what it would look like to connect solar and then be able to build storage or forecast storage that we might be able to use to leverage our transition to a zero emissions economy? They are not the ones that are set up to do that. They absolutely can help you when it comes to connections. They're accountable to their shareholders because they're privatized, the Australian Energy Regulator, the Essential Services Commission, which is only in Victoria, and the Australian Energy Market Commission. The Australian Energy Market Commission is the group that makes the rules that the AER then implements. In order to affect change, we need to get the AEMC to do more rule changes to allow the AER to enforce these on distribution companies. If you remember one thing from my presentation, it's that. Their goal as a distribution company is effectively to meet the NEO and promote the efficient investment in operation of electricity services for the long-term interest of consumers as with respect to price, quality, safety, and reliability, and the security of electricity supply. Nowhere in there are the words renewable or climate or emissions. That is not something that the distribution companies face in their RIT-D, which is the regulatory investment test for distribution companies. It's the same challenge that Alistair was alluding to in his presentation around what needs to happen in terms of regulatory change to drive these kinds of outcomes for our communities. Primary service offering, connections. So, that said, this is just the framework. This isn't nefarious. They're not trying to be a blocker, but this is the framework that we're working within in order to structure how we collaborate with these entities. From a distribution perspective, privacy and probity are top of mind. If we can regulate, if we can create policy to support and protect and mitigate risk, distribution companies will fall in line. Each distribution company has different data available and different processes for collaboration. There's no one size fits all. It's not a template that we can lift and shift across distribution companies. And the data access that I was mentioning earlier that's critical to some of these feasibility studies, it's still a process that we're working through. It's not something that is required to be provided publicly. And C4Net can help you get access to certain elements of data and can help you in early stages of feasibility. But it's something that I think we need to understand is not just readily available to enable all of the type of change that we're all speaking for. Lack of accountability. Now, I really struggled with how to phrase this because I didn't want it to come off as super negative, but I couldn't think of another word. There just isn't anyone internally that's specifically accountable for enabling some of this change. There's not one account manager, there's not one person. I'm sure you've all struggled with, I need to talk to somebody about hypothetically this, getting an MOU, early stage feasibility conversations. They're not set up to create that kind of support for the industry currently. And quality assurance pathways to integration are questionable. What I mean by that is we are asking incumbents in the energy sector to provide us with insights and data that they haven't had to do before. So this is somewhat speculative on their part, right? We're asking them to provide us data where they've never had to pull this data or manage this data from either smart meter infrastructure or other network operations. So they're pulling it and they're providing it, and then sometimes the data doesn't make sense. We need to understand how to manage big data sets. There's a lot of interpretation that needs to occur as well. So where are the opportunities that invest for, or where are there opportunities for co-investing in either microgrid solutions or collaborating with these entities? First of all, DNSPs are doing a lot of work in this area from within their regulatory structure. They're looking at something called a local use of system tariff, which is trying to understand if you were to create a local microgrid, that means that you're maybe not tapping into all of the electricity supply chain that you were when generation was here, transmission was here, and they're servicing your local area. What would it look like for a local use of system tariff to occur, to exist, to where you can create your own community energy source and at the same time have it be partially islanded so that it's still connected in case there's some kind of reliability issue with the existing system? You've got some reliability guarantees moving forwards. This is stuff that they're exploring currently. There are some min-max demand requirements that a microgrid or a localized system might be able to help networks with. Again, it's not something that you can create today and say, we'll manage this on your behalf. But if you're having conversations around how to manage these broader issues within the sector, and we're talking about how a whole of system transition could occur, we should be looking at how distributed energy resources can help support min-max demand requirements. I'll move on to community groups. Community groups, you just have more creative contracting opportunities. You have more innovation. You have more insight. You have a broader remit to be able to think creatively about how commercial arrangements can work. Networks, particularly distribution networks, are heavily regulated in how they can make their money. So when they look at an asset and they look at the return on investment on that asset, they can't access all of the different revenue pathways that a community energy group or some kind of independent entity might be able to. You also have much better stakeholder engagement and communication than distribution companies and or other groups within the sector. It's a vastly underrepresented function within these groups. This also taps into what we were mentioning in terms of there's a massive skills gap in both communications and stakeholder engagement in the sector. So by being able to galvanize your local area and being able to serve that function back to these groups, that's a huge asset for them. Risk management. So inherently, these incumbents are risk averse. Their entire modus operandi is to reduce risk down to a negligible factor to ensure that there's a reliability of supply to you as the end user. Anything that we can do to come back to them again as a system-wide plan and say, here's how we can effectively reduce risk. Here's how a standalone power system in my area is actually going to help mitigate bushfire risk because we don't have lines going above ground between here and here. These are areas that we might be able to position to help, again, from a regulatory and policy perspective, inform the benefits of localized community energy solutions. And then again, just generally, we want to provide a collaborative pathway to an energy future. These are, again, incumbents that have been operating for 100 to 120 years without needing to collaborate. We need to get this from point A to point B, and now we're saying, here's a whole host of opportunities. They just don't have the capability to understand how to do that. And we are at the pointy edge of trying to drive that change. So what can C4Net do in terms of helping this group? Again, we fund research. So we've worked on a project collaboratively with GWM Water and Power Corps on Donald and Tarnagulla. We can help provide access to data. We can help collaborate among diverse stakeholders. We don't have an agenda at all in this game. And we have very close working relationships with both the DNSPs and DELP. Again, what I want to spend a little bit of time talking about is this enhanced system plan. Everything that I mentioned is, again, at the localized distribution level. And there isn't a whole of system plan for that distribution level to actually be able to work and leverage all of these opportunities back up. So we're really working hard to try to get funding and coordination to develop something that's comparable to the ISP, or Integrated System Plan for Transmission, at a sub-transmission level, so that when we talk about areas of opportunity within the electricity transformation, that's looking at not only transmission and then feeding back down, but it's a bottom-up approach as well. So pathways to collaboration. We need to work with DELP and DNSPs to identify gaps in information provisions. We also need to work collaboratively with the AEMC and the AER to try to drive that regulatory change. because some of the existing incumbents are just going to be reactive inherently, and that's how they operate. And so if we can inform that reaction, then we're going to get better outcomes for our communities. Proactively address privacy and process considerations. So if there's a challenge that you're facing when it comes to engaging with some of these incumbents, make sure you're raising it with DELP, make sure you're raising it with your councils and your CVGA groups. Again, AEMC rule change submissions. Understand the value proposition to different stakeholders. So when you're talking to a DNSP, again, what's their value proposition, right? They're looking to mitigate risk. If we're going to help mitigate risk from a bushfire perspective, we're going to help mitigate risk from a reliability perspective. How does this fall within the construct of how they do their business case analysis? But that said, clearly prioritize your objectives, because the sooner you can go to these connection groups and say, this is the type of connection that I want, or this is the type of connection that I want to explore, the easier it's going to be for you to get feedback and for you to get engagement by them in a meaningful way. So I tried to rush through that so we could get to lunch. Anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Ruchika. We'll throw it to the room. Any questions? Depends how hungry they are, doesn't it? You were pretty comprehensive. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
much
you.
Appreciated. Thank you. So as we take a short break for lunch, so we've kind of gone through all the policy positions, a bit of the history. This afternoon we're going to talk about some real practical examples of things that are happening in our communities and take some of those learnings from it. So look forward to spending the afternoon with you. Okay, lunch is waiting. Thank you. And I'll apologise in advance. I've now had 6 macarons and I'm not sure what the sugar's going to do to me in the next couple of hours, so I might get a little bit jittery.